Rabbi Twerski has developed a science to the development of self-esteem enhancement. And he's developed these 12 steps, and I am going to serve for this next segment as an interviewer of Rabbi Twerski to discuss with him and for our therapists and our parents and our group these 6 steps for this morning and 6 steps this afternoon, and he'll give some examples and some therapeutic interventions of how to make the enhancements for our students, Talmidim, our children, our spouses, ourselves, to develop our own self-esteem. So step number 1 that Rabbi Twerski has identified is to recognize that you have low self-esteem, to evaluate. Step number 1 is you have to know that you have low self-esteem. So Dr. Twerski, could you tell us about journaling to become emotionally aware of your low self-esteem? How is journaling important for emotional awareness and recording negative emotions so that we could have a record of your own low self-esteem to be able to know what to repair?
Well, I didn't get my awareness through journaling. I got my awareness through being in hot springs and discovering that I didn't like myself. Let me mention something about journaling, because this is going to come up again and again. I wrote the book 10 Steps to Being Your Best. And there are a number of exercises on each step, but almost all of them deal with the importance of journalizing. And I found that in Shlomo Walba in his Sefer Alei Shul, which is a contemporary Mussar Sefer. It's very interesting. I think that Hashem has given us in every generation the kind of things that that generation needs. There was a generation that needed Chovos Halvovos, and a generation that needed Tshuva, right? And there was a generation that needed Mesilas Yesharim. Of course, we need all of those. But we also need some contemporary things to deal with the issues that we have today. And the time of Alma is, I think, as close as we can get to our own time. And his Sefer Alei Shul is a Sefer on Mussar. There's so many wonderful insights in there. And he has a section in Volume 1 on Das Atzmoi, knowing oneself. Right? He points out the enormous importance of writing things down, keeping a journal, and he says, don't keep them in little slips of paper because you lose them. Right? Right. But have a notebook which you can write in and refer to, and talks about the need to have writing stations, because if you wait until at night to record all the events of the day, some of them may be forgotten. So he suggests having writing stations like 2 or 3 times during the day to write things down. This happened, this happened. Later at night you can review them. I think there's enormous value to that, because when things happen, we may not be in a mode to analyze them correctly. But if we later on, when our mind is at ease and we're not under particular stress, and you can find time to go over the things that happened during the day, and then you can look at them and say, is this is what happened, and I reacted, and I did this. That can be much more helpful. I think we have to be brutally honest about ourselves and about the feelings that we have. Because what happens is that we have a psychological defense mechanism called denial. And denial is a mechanism where the mind blocks out something that it does not want to know. That's unbelievably common in various forms. Let me give you an example of how denial can work. When I was an intern, it goes back to 1959, there was a woman admitted to the hospital who was suspected of having a cancer. And she told the doctor, look, I don't want you to treat me with kid gloves. I don't want you to be kind to me. I need to know the truth. Right? So they operated and they found out that she had cancer of the ovary. And the doctor told her, and she thanked the doctor for being straight and forward with her, and told her that she would undergo chemotherapy. So the chemotherapy had to be given intravenously. But the poor woman had the worst veins in the world. And every time she came for treatment, she had to be stuck 4 or 5 times. One time she came, I was on duty, so I found that she had a tiny little vein on the top of her hand here. So I took a very fine needle and entered the vein without sticking her 6 times. And so she said from there on that I'm the only one who knows how to do it. So she's going to come when she knows she can find me. I always worked on Sundays, so she used to come in on Sunday, and she would come in and she'd come to the desk and she'd say she's here for her cancer shot. And she would talk about how fortunate it is that she is living in an era when medicine has found treatment for cancer. After about 6 months, the treatment stopped working. And she began having symptoms of the spread of the cancer. She had joint pains and shortness of breath. And she was readmitted to the hospital. And she said to me, she was very angry. She says, I can't understand what it is with you doctors. I've been coming here for about 8 months, and no one has been able to find out what's wrong with me. I said, wait a minute. She came in every week saying she's here for her cancer shot. Right? And now, nobody's been able to find out what's wrong with me. What happens was that as long as cancer was an abstract term, she could deal with it. But when the cancer became something real, and she felt there was a threat to her life, right? And she really felt it, right? Denial went in. She didn't know she had cancer. And I think that's a powerful example of how the mind defends itself and doesn't let you feel about anything that is too threatening and too painful to you. And that happens all the time in many different ways. If we really were honest and known about ourselves, how proud would we be of ourselves? You know, when I finished my training, they wanted me to go into psychoanalytic training. And they said that this was important because through psychoanalysis, I would really find out all of my desires and all my drives and whatever. Because the logic is that unless you really know yourself, what happens is that you might be dealing with a problem that the patient has, and because it's a little too close for comfort, you'll avoid it. Right? If the patient happens to be dealing with the problem and you feel sensitive to that and you don't want to deal with that because it hurts you to talk about it, right? You'll avoid dealing with the patient because it's your own thing that you're avoiding. Therefore, you go into psychoanalysis in order to discover all of the drives that are operative within you. So I said, I don't have to do that because I already know everything that's within me. He said, you can't. There's no such thing. I said, look, let me explain this to you. I said, the Talmud tells us that when Moses came up to heaven to get the Torah, that the angels protested. And they said to God, don't give the Torah to these mortals, the human beings. They don't deserve it. They're not capable, they'll violate it. Give the Torah to us, to angels. So God said to Moses, can you rebut their argument? So Moses said, all right, you want the Torah? The Torah says, do not covet your neighbor's wife. Does that apply to you? No. No. The Torah says you shall not steal. Do you have anything here up in heaven that you can steal? The Torah says you shall not kill. Yeah. Can you kill an angel? So Moses, going through this, said, look, the Torah is meaningless for you. The reason it has to be given to mortals, right, is people have those drives that need to be controlled. It doesn't apply to angels. Okay. I said, now given that, so the angels did not get the Torah, and so why was the Torah given to me? It was given to every Jew, right? So the Torah was given to me. The Torah was given to me because I need it. Right? If I was like an angel, I don't need the Torah. Right? Now there are 365 restrictions, things that the Torah forbids. Right? And the Torah is talking to me. And it's telling me that there are 365 things that I am not permitted to do. Now, why is the Torah telling me that? Because I must have a desire for all of these things. If I didn't have any tendency to those things, the Torah would not have told it to me. Because the Torah was not given to angels. It was given to us because we need it, because we have these drives. Wait a minute. The Torah says, forbids incestuous relationships. I don't have a desire for incestuous relationship. I think it's disgusting. Huh? You mean the Torah wasn't talking to me? I have to come to terms with the fact that if the Torah tells me you are not permitted to have an incestuous relationship, that somewhere within me there is that desire. But I'm not aware of it. I think it's a terrible thing. Well, it's in my unconscious. Freud was right about that. The Torah tells us that you're not allowed to have homosexual relationships. To me, it's abhorrent. It's a disgusting, it's an abomination. Right? So why is the Torah telling it to me? Huh? I must have someplace in my unconscious a tendency for homosexuality. But how can that be? It turns me off. Yeah, your conscious mind gets turned off and the unconscious is there. So I say, if you go through everything that the Torah forbids, the Torah forbids don't kill. I'm not a murderer. I don't like killing a mosquito. If I hadn't had that desire, if I hadn't had that tendency, but I'm not aware of it. Of course you're not aware of it. It's in your unconscious. Right? So Freud did us such enormous favor by telling us that there's part of our mind that is our unconscious, and there's a lot of things in our unconscious that we would be totally shocked to be aware of. So I told them, I said, look, I don't have to lie on a psychoanalyst couch 5 days a week for 3 years for them to tell me at the end of it that he discovers that I have some latent homosexual tendencies. I said, of course I must have them, because the Torah told me not to have them. Right? And if I didn't have them, then the Torah never would have told it to me. I said, you're not going to tell me anything. The psychoanalyst isn't going to tell me anything that I don't know. He says, to be honest with oneself is to realize what one's thoughts are, what one's motivations are, what one's most desires are, and not to be shocked by them, but to be aware this is because we are an animal body. Don't deny your animal self. Now, animals are animals because they're supposed to be animals. We are human beings. We are not supposed to be animals. Right? So we were given an neshama, we were given a spirit that enables us to subdue our animal desires. But it doesn't mean we don't have them. Right? Now, if we deny them, now we're denying a reality. So, being honest with yourself and not rejecting anything that you think is abhorrent and realizing this is part of me, this is part of my animal nature, Right? It doesn't. I'm not a terrible person for having these feelings. I'm not a terrible person for having these thoughts. It's just that I am not an animal. I'm supposed to overcome, and so I have to work. I have to work at elevating myself as a human being, and this is a process of spirituality which has never ended, right? Because we can always grow. We can always grow spiritually. So one of the things in discovering a self-esteem, first of all, if you look through some of the things that I talk about the behaviors of low self-esteem, do we define that in ourselves? Do we find that we are people pleasers? Right? Do I find that we seek approval for everything? No. There's nothing wrong with wanting a compliment. There's nothing wrong with wanting approval. Right? But the question is, how much of it does it become, and what kind of things do we do in order to get approval? Right? There are some people who, if you're working on seating people at a banquet, and you're on the committee that does the seating, it's very likely that you find, he has to be given a seat of honor, because if we don't, we'll never hear the end of it. She has to sit up at near the front, near the head table, but otherwise we'll never hear the end of it. So you see that there are people who are so starved out for approval, right, that they're looking for recognition, they're looking for approval. So it's normal to want to be complimented, it's normal to want to be liked, but the question of how far do you go for it? Right? So if you begin to discover for yourself, there's something wrong with me if I walk 4 miles in a cold day, right, when I could have been there, right, and recognize that. Why did I do that? Right? I do that because I was looking for his approval. Right? And then look at the kinds of things that we do, and generalizing, like 2 or 3 times during the day, to write down some of the little things, and then looking it over, and looking at the kind of things that are there. Why did I do that? Assertiveness. Right? You buy something, and then you discover later on that you think is a little defective, right? But you won't go back to the store to return it. Right? You want to avoid the confrontation. Right? Why? And you begin to look at, are you a people pleaser? Are you afraid of rejection? Now, nobody likes rejection. But if a person applies for a job and is turned down, and then does not go out for more interviews because he's afraid of rejection, right? That's a low self-esteem kind of thing. It's not pleasant to be rejected, but just because you're rejected once doesn't mean you generalize, right? I'm never going to succeed. So what you do is, during the day, take a few minutes out to jot down what happened. It doesn't take more than 30 seconds. And then at night, find some time, hopefully that you'll find some time in a quiet atmosphere to be able to look over the kind of things that happened during the day and to see, why did this happen? Anger, resentment. How did I handle my anger? And how did I handle my resentment? Anger is a powerful emotion. It's an animalistic emotion. Right? And it's very interesting, the importance of anger, that the Ramban in his letter to his son starts out with, bring your anger under control. Now he doesn't mean anger, he means rage. And by the way, we have to differentiate between anger and rage. Right? Somebody provokes you and you feel angry. You don't have any choice for that. You have no control as to whether you feel angry or not. Your choice is, how are you going to react? Right? How do you handle it? Reaction to anger is rage. Right? You also have a choice as to how long do I want to hang on to the anger. For an hour, for 2 hours, for 22 years? How long do I want to hang on to it? That we have a choice. But the feeling of anger itself should not be a low self-esteem issue. Right? And you would become aware that you're angry, you become aware that you have resentments. These are things that we have to deal with. You know, the Chofetz Chaim, nobody ever saw the Chofetz Chaim angry, because he was in perfect control of himself. The Chofetz Chaim used to come in at night and open the Oven Kodesh and cry bitterly that Hashem should take his feelings of anger away. He could control whether he wasn't going to react to anger. Right? But the feeling of anger when provoked, he had no choice on that. That's the built-in kind of thing. Right? So we become aware of our feelings, and just the aware of our feelings isn't enough. You have to write it down. The importance of writing down didn't occur to me till one Rosh Hashanah I realized how much emphasis we talk about writing down. Lishona tova tikosev. Right? Yeah. Inscribe me in the book of life. Now, Hashem doesn't need to write. He's got a good memory. Right? But even though Hashem has an excellent memory and never forgets, he wants things written down. And we want things written down. Right? So writing is extremely important, and journalizing. The problem is it's a task. It's one of the things that we'd rather not do. Trust me, there's things that we should be doing, like exercising, and if we've got some antipathy toward it, we find 18 excuses why not to do it. I know from my own experience. So we journalize, we write things down, and then at the end of the day we make a list. And when you do that, and you do that long enough, you'll begin to realize some things about yourself that you didn't know before.